Hello, everyone. Welcome to episode 5 of the Building Foodtech podcast. We're here in a new recording space. Thank you very much to Innovation Studio for allowing us to use it. Thank you to Jordan Elster for helping to organize this. So big kudos to him and shout out to him. Brad, just wanted to kind of really quickly do a recap. Our last episode, we were at Freight Farms, your old stomping ground, and your baby. And I just wanted to get, you're kind of seeing a kid come back from college, right? Mm-hmm. You're getting to see, what it looks like and how it's running right now. And, I don't know how often you get to go back and take a look at what's going on over at Freight Farms. But, as a founder and as, someone who's grown it to zero to, some point and then kind of, giving it some space and then going on and building Morrissey Market, kind of being that parent who sees their kid coming back from college, what's your impression of your kid?
I think, you always love your kid, unconditionally. So there's that. No, I think overall, I think I mentioned this, it was pretty surreal to be back there and be recording with you, talking about building Foodtech, at this point in time, where the world is, where the market is, all of that. But overall, it's just, an immense sense of kind of, I guess, pride and, awe. And, I guess in a lot of ways I get to talk to Dave and Allison, just gratitude. Because, I know all the hard work that Dave and his team, put in day to day. Allison and the team she does, all the work they do. And I'm like, you guys are, hustling on it, grinding on it, doing the hard work every day, putting in the reps, and it's just great to see that something I created has grown on to be independent and is inspiring others to put in the kind of work that truthfully, as a founder, you put in spades. Yep. And I'm like, wow, it's to your point, I don't spend every day over there, obviously, but when I do check in, and when I do touch base with different departments, everyone's on it, to the extent you would expect if it was just, the small founding team. So that's really exciting.
And I think as as founders, I think the parent analogy is almost really apt at some point, right? Because at some point it's you have to literally be on top of your toddler, if you will, early stage company, and you got to spoon feed it, you got to change its diaper, you got to deal with the messes and whatever else, right? And that's kind of something to be expected. And then at some point, it's less and less and less, or in some different cases, right? Yeah. Some companies need a little bit more attention and more attentiveness for whatever reason. And I think that, that analogy is kind of apt. And then, at some point, as a founder, unless you're going to be something really attached to a company, at some point it's okay, they're better people to be able to run it at these different stages, and then you kind of hands off and move on.
Yeah, I think I hate the family analogy in startup world, just in general. I think the team analogy always works way better because your family, you're there for life, right. No matter what. And whereas a team, you're obligated to your teammates, you're obligated to win, and somebody always has to make the decision to put the best team together to get to the objective, which is to
I guess it's true.
And so I do think one of the things as you were talking, as I was thinking about it a little further, is you're a founder forever, and there's an obligation to that company, and that is why it can be your baby as a founder. As a founder, you can have the baby; it's a family to you, but day to day, it's that team mentality where there's you got to coach you got to coach them up, you got to do all these things, what was it Bill Parcells used to say, you're either coaching it or you're letting it happen, and I think in a lot of ways that's where as a founder, and sort of what I've tried to do is stay connected to the company, connected to the team, at any level that's helpful, more or less, so that you kind of always have, it's almost whoever comes in after you is the succeeding coach, or maybe you kick to the GM's office, cool, maybe not, whatever the analogy is, but at the end of the day, you're always connected to it because it's a family to you.
Right.
But then you're realizing like, okay, like you're hiring a team, and those parts move around, you know, and like part of the founder job as like watching after your baby is to have that one unconditional love, unconditional belief, but then also kind of be ready to kick it back into like, hey, like we need to coach up this section, or we're letting it go wrong. And like, yeah, I'm not here every day, but eyes on it, you know. So
I will say though, you know, like I think maybe we can separate it out and not say like necessarily that. I think you can have a team culture like internally, but when you look at it from a career perspective as a founder specifically, perhaps you can look at it as being that parent-child relationship and kind of have that separation. Like when I'm with the team, it's like a football team, right? We're here to win a Super Bowl. We're here to grind, and like, you know, I am the coach. I'm here to make you better. I'm also the GM, like kind of like a Bill Belichick, like 2-in-1, right? Like I am selecting the players who are going to be on my team, you know, but like ultimately we're gonna work as a team to like go out and do something. Yeah. But then if you take a couple steps back, you're like, this is kind of a, you know, familial relationship, right? And I think in some cases, right, you know, the more that I think about it, you know, like there are a ton of analogies that kind of work in a funny way where you're like, you're such a, like between a first time parent / founder, right? And then your second child, right? There's almost that like, you know, we gotta make sure this first kid survives. And then the second kid, you know, like, you get a little looser about it, right? Yeah. I almost find that kind of funny that's, you know, like a lot of things in life, we work with analogies, we work with sayings to kind of frame things in our mind. And I think it's good to get like clarity on those specific points.
Yeah. I mean, I think I just said like my allergic reaction to the family thing. I agree with you. Like from a founder perspective, your baby is the corporate entity, you know? And so that once you're in it, you're with the team, you know. But I think like for founding teams, for early teams, all of that, like it has to be a team, and you have to know that. Where it's like, just as like, you know, I think early days I would get hurt if somebody wanted to move on from the company, because I had that family idea. You can't leave. You can't leave. What do we do? We're doing this, and it's like, yeah, but at the end of the day, I'm not your family. Like, you know, as you grow up, you're like, okay, I'm looking out for like myself, my wife, my kids, whatever. That's my family.
But a couple steps back, as people, we are technically like, you know, there is a relationship built, right? And it might not be a professional one, might be a personal one, right? In terms of like, you're like, I remember you for having worked at my company, and look, if you come back and you need a job, or you know, you were a great employee for me, like there's that kind of adoptive family mentality at some levels. I think, like
well, I mean, I think it's. I mean, you know, whatever the stats are, like, you know, X many marriages and what happen at work. You know, like people do meet each other, they form relationships. That's the human nature of it. You know, I've found it as I've grown and run a few companies is looking at it as a team and being very open, forthright, and you know, just honest with the team, with yourself, with everybody. That like, you know, that way you you don't tangle up the family stuff with the work stuff, where you can be like, we're gonna part ways. You're a great, you know, like, and if you know, you're an awesome person, I want to remain friends with you. You know, all these other things, so that like, you know, the world changes pretty rapidly. We might be back together in a year, working together again. You know, and that'd be awesome. You know, but like right now, it's not a fit. And
I think like those are like degrees of separation, because I think I also a lot of times, like when I'm talking to certain founders, you know, they get tunnel vision on one particular thing that they're working on, right? And you know, it leads sometimes to bad behavior when I'm like, look, you got to look at the totality of your career sometimes, right? There's the micro things that you're worried about specifically about the company, but look, there's some things you can do. You can like, you know, burn the boats, you know, go all in on a business and all that type of stuff. But look, life is long. You've got a whole career to look out on, and like especially when it comes to team dynamics and with, you know, like long-term career perspective, there's almost like, you know, you're building like a lifelong relationship with Dave, Allison, other employees that you've worked with, and within Morrissey Market, right? Where look, it might not be just about Morrissey Market. They come, they go, they leave, and then look, life is long. 10 years down the line, you started company number 3, 4, and like, hey, I'm looking for a great VP of sales. You were amazing to me for that last company.
Yep.
We still have this relation. So, I think that, that's part of the things that makes founder life so hard, right? We're juggling multiple different, almost like narratives within our lives, right? There's the team with this particular company, but then I also got to juggle that with in the outside, macro life, right? And so, what makes it challenging? But I'm sure a lot of, other professions, a lot of other people go through similar things, and so, we just all got to learn to work within it.
Yeah, no, I mean, that's why I say, like, talking about it, having learned from it, there's no right way to do it. Like there's some founders, are dedicated to building their cult, and it's like, which is not a bad thing. Like, you need to have something that is bigger than, just a paycheck, because startups are not, if you're in it for the money, good luck, but like, odds are not in your favor on this
sure.
Generally speaking. So there has to be an element there, but everyone gets there in their own way.
Yeah. And the one thing that I was like, just kind of spending the whole day there and taking a look, right? I think that what I got to experience is like, every day as a founder you get hit with the stick. But this was like kind of getting to see the carrot at some points, right? And being able to see what in at scale company looks like, right? It almost looks normal, right? There are cubicles and sort of cubicles, and like, a company stand up that we got to see the tail end of when we were there, and then you had the retail space, so there's like extra, right? And there's R&D space, and it felt like, the same things as like if you were watching like Mr. Rogers back in the day, you'd see like the behind the scenes look at like a factory or a established company. It's what it feels like. And so that was like something that, not just like, being able to see it, right, and be a part of it even for that day, it's just like that's like a kind of a goal.
Yeah. I mean, again, like I think, coming back to it, it's like from my perspective, it's like the founder who was in there with you, which was really cool to be able to like walk through with you and have you see all that. Honestly, I don't see any of that. I didn't feel any of that.
Oh, really?
Yeah, like there was no, I think you're set up in one way only, which is like, this is great, where are we going? How do we do better? And so, a bunch of things that, I would see that, I'm sure others would see or whatnot, but like, it's really hard. I think it's, as a founder, no matter what stage your company gets to, it's really hard to be impressed with yourself and your company.
I see.
Like, so, being there, if 8-9 years ago Brad had walked through there and been like, hey, you get like 4 minutes to check it out because this is what the future would be like, I'd be like, oh, hell yeah. Like, are you kidding me? This is a dream. But like, you build it up, you put in the time, you see all the hard work that everyone does, and you get there and you're like, oh man, like, it could be more.
It could be more. Yeah, I see that. that. Yeah. That's good. I mean, that's a good mindset and a mentality to have. I mean, I think when you're talking about a company like Freight Farms, which you built at the beginning, and then you made it to a point, and then now it's beyond, right? I think that, a lot of times, a lot of these companies, right, when they hit that at scale perspective, right, you can't be a startup anymore. You have to be a formal business and become enterprise at some point, right?
Sure.
And I think that, I think it's a good testament of like maybe perhaps where we are in our careers, right?
Yeah.
Perhaps like when you look at something like that, you're looking for the next thing, right? And it's because you're at a different stage in your career. Whereas for me, I'm thinking about like, operating different startups and building companies, right? I probably only have built startups in the startup stage. They've gotten acquired within that early stage. And for me, in my career, right? Like, you could, and maybe I'd love to hear your perspective on this before we move on to the next topic.
Yeah.
Like, I think that one of the most pervasive things within startup culture, and why I'm so like, I don't even want to say the word startup in some particular ways. I want to actually consider it as being like, you're either working on a project or you're building a business. And there's a time when the project gets turned into a business, whether that's the product market fit point or just the we got to incorporate and like actually like we get our first paycheck type of thing, right? Like, but like, I think that that's a major difference than there's a startup and right, so business happens at some point, right?
Yep.
I think that it really helps clarify because look, you can fail at a project and just it's not really that. You completed the project, right?
Yep.
You found out that there is no business here,
right?
As opposed to the pressure of being like, I created a startup and then like I built it and then I failed because the startup shut down. And I think that that's an insanely different type of pressure, right? Like it's a scarlet letter almost for some people to be like, you know, I failed at a startup.
Yeah.
And so I think that the way of like framing some of that, it's like a major toxicity that's been introduced into our ecosystem, but also, you know, it can lead to a lot of imposter syndrome, right? Because of there's the startup world, there's the business world, as opposed to like, look, we're working on a project, we're going to see if there's an actual business, and then if there seems to be business here, we're going to cut over and do it. We're now fully a business. And I think maybe in my mind that can help. I'd love to get your particular thoughts on that.
Yeah. The premise I agree with. You know, it's much easier, and everything should be kind of like project hypothesis based to start, where you're like, I'm testing this out.
We're both pretty sciencey people,
you know,
right?
And so it's like, cool. Like, what did I learn? What's next? You know, did I iterate through that hypothesis to get to something where you go, wow, okay, I've proven these points. And to your point, this is a business opportunity beyond what like I thought something, and therefore like, you know, if you just think something, it's probably not in your best interest. Just, I thought it. It's a business, you know. You know, especially if you have to build anything or talk to a customer or anything like that. But I think when it comes to, there's two parts of that problem. Like, I think, you know, and again, I don't have enough startup exposure in the Valley, like having not started companies there, I've only started here, but, you know, having known people who have and things, you know, there's almost an inherent understanding, I think, in like the Valley where all these really smart, talented, motivated people who are looking to solve problems have projects going. And the investor community, be it angels, be it pre-seed, seed funds, venture funds, etc., those that generally, you know, you get funding from, are looking for projects that are like showing signs that they might flip. Whereas, you know, I don't know, like my initial reaction is you're in Boston, and this might be an ecosystem problem. Is you're in Boston, if you talk to an angel, a pre-seed fund, a seed fund, and you say like, oh, I'm working on this project, you know, here's what I've learned, here's what I've validated, I'm getting really excited about the opportunity, but I need to figure out X, Y, and Z. Like they'll be like, oh, okay, so that's a project. It's not a business. I'm not funding projects. I fund businesses. You know, so it's like somebody will give you, like, don't bring a project to like an angel meeting or something like that. Bring your startup. You know, and so there's that like that piece where like from a, you know, I don't know if it's a ecosystem conservative bent of Boston that is left over from ages and ages, you know, or if it's something else, but I think that's where the rub is. So it's like, founder, like keep project mentality, you know, until you have decided internally that like, yes, I validated, yes, this is business, this is the business opportunity, and now it's a startup, you know, but like play the game on the field, like bring the startup because you're asking someone to fund a business versus a project, whereas I think that might, you know, I hadn't thought about this at all, so like this is firing live here, but like that could be one of the core differences and maybe problems, if we want to call it that, between like a Valley ecosystem and a Boston ecosystem, where like an early stage like angel, former operator, fund in the Valley, you know, is interested in your project that like, you know, or you've learned a bunch, you haven't learned it all, who has, you know, I think your next phase, like, if that works, that's going to turn to something special. I don't know what the business is going to look like yet. That's your job. That's not my job as the investor. It's your job to do that work. But like, I want to put money behind you, that idea, and that project because, you know, maybe experience or whatnot. There's enough experience, enough returns around people who put money into projects that turned into really big companies.
And I think, like, I think you've hit on something that's really interesting about, like, just culturally speaking, right? Because I think that and it's what feeds into, like, imposter syndrome as being part of, like, a huge part of, at least within East Coast culture, like, who am I? Why am I doing this? Like, it starts creeping in. There's almost like a condescension, right? Oh, you're working on a project, right? Like, come back to me when this is actually something serious or real. And I think that you can't be a seed fund if you're not actually willing to seed things, right? And it's funny that we, this podcast is in food and in agriculture, right? To be like, look, are we actually putting, are we actually planting seeds in the ground? Or are you just waiting for the full apple tree and you're going to just harvest, right? Are you seeding or are you harvesting? Right? And I think that sometimes, right, I don't know where, I mean, it's risk aversion, definitely, right? Because, it doesn't make sense. Hey, there's a full orchard, we're just going to worry about the fruit and, whatever happens, right? But, like, look, the Valley's successful because they're not just thinking about that orchard, they see an empty field that's next to the orchard, and they're like, well, what if I just pluck some apples over there, but then use the seeds, I could potentially get more trees out of it, right? Who knows? The land could be fallow, and like I could have wasted a bunch of time and effort. But if we get more trees, those trees are mine now, right? And I can reap the full value of it, not competing with a bunch of other people. Blah 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 blah, right? And so, I think that just from the early stage, right, it's such a huge critical like culture problem. I think within the city, right, people are only considered investable if they're fully viable products. And I think that there's different levels of investment where it's like, hey, maybe it's not VC worthy, but like I think that.
Well, I think it's a proof point in a decision that the founder has to make, where it's like you run your project, you test your hypothesis, and at a certain point you're figuring out, is this a VC fundable business at all? Right. And if it's not, and you still love it and you want to do it, it's the matter of like, okay, I have to be honest with myself, like this is not a VC fundable business. So,
and that's where the angels come in to bridge that gap.
And I think I've seen it more broadly based, but like, what is the concept or somebody jammed some words together called seed, the company is seed strapped. So it's like, instead of bootstrapped, it's like, okay, we raised a little bit of money at the seed stage, like to see what it is, and then it's like, you know what, like you can build a really compelling, pretty big business with no outside funding for a while, and can wait on that decision of this is a venture backable business, whatever, and maybe make some early day unnatural business decisions because you're pursuing venture, which comes with its own obligations. Instead, just build the absolute right business and be like, there's a good chance this turns into like a business that I'll take Series B funding for. I'm going to skip like a formal seed round. I'm going to skip the A and just have a relative mature business that's like, holy crow, we're going to pour some fuel in the tank and take this thing to the moon. So I don't know.
It's interesting. Like look, some people are built for the flywheel of like, hey, I raise a seed, we're gonna run in mad dash, and then we're going to raise our Series A after within a year, because that's just the timelines that are baked into almost the returns that are expected, even if it's paper games, right, that are expected in VCs, because the incentive is to raise your next fund based off of benchmark performances. You're not going to see actualized returns for 10 years, but you can say like, hey, look, within a year, I invested into these companies. They're already marked up on paper by this amount by later stage funds, right? And this is the progress that these companies have discernibly made. Some founders and some ideas and some companies are built for that, but not everything. And so I think that maybe that's like that's like the legit like financial reason for why there's that conservatism in like the investment like community and mindset.
Yep.
But I think that I also don't want to, because like as I'm listening to myself, right, I also think that founders need to take some responsibility, right?
Yeah.
There needs to be work that's done to get you to a certain point, right? That project into business, right?
Yeah.
And that, you know, like some businesses are just not venture scalable, right? And maybe there's some education and some, you know, like context that needs to be provided to be able to do that. And I think maybe we can have that discussion about Freight Farms, right? Like, you know, how old is Freight Farms actually? Do you know? Sorry.
Formally 2012.
2012, so we're about 12 years.
Yep.
So you're kind of in the process of building Freight Farms, right?
Mm-hmm.
You're at this point now where we actually saw and was in the news, right, that Freight Farms had terminated a combination agreement with a SPAC, and you know, just for the audience, in case you're not familiar with that, because it's public market stuff, which most people may or may not be familiar with it. SPAC, special purpose acquisition vehicles. They're basically companies where not in dissimilar to venture capital in a way, where they basically raise a bunch of money from LPs, usually more institutional people. These funds can get up to, companies with cash holdings of over, you know, billions of dollars. And their purpose is to go public, be traded as a public company, and look for a promising private company to acquire. That's where the acquisition part of SPAC comes into it, where basically it's like Indiana Jones, right? You're lifting up the egg, and then you're just like hot swap, right?
Yeah.
And it's the same way with like a private company. You're basically saying in the early stage, you invest into a SPAC because you believe in the SPAC manager's ability to merge with a promising company.
Yep.
And you know, in the case, one of these special purpose acquisition companies sought out Freight Farms, and we saw actually what was it, Plenty, or which one was the one that went by SPAC?
I mean, there was a few. So like
Arrow Farms, I think.
Arrow Farms had a deal. I don't know if they ever actually did it. App Harvest.
That was the one I was thinking of.
Went public via SPAC. It was a disaster.
Yeah.
But anybody who knew the business and knew the industry was like, this is gonna end poorly. But yeah, no, I think so. What I had shared with you is that you know the companies had announced that you know they had terminated the BCA, the business combination agreement, which is that agreement that the SPAC sponsor and Freight Farms had come to, you know, 18 some odd months ago or something like that. You know, to say, hey, you've been targeting us. Yes, we're the right fit for your target, your investor base, to basically do that swap. Where, you know, you'll acquire us, and then we'll be operating as a public company on the Toronto Stock Exchange.
Right.
Good exchange, really diligent, all those other things. So, you know, and you know, there's always, I can imagine, a myriad of reasons to like terminate a combination agreement. You know, and you know, I guess you could say my view on the SPAC now that it's like, it was like this strange period to be in where you couldn't really talk about it because like technically you were still doing diligence with the Toronto Stock Exchange, so it was almost like a quiet period, which was really weird. Which just speaks to like, you know, the level of rigor, expense, and oversight to be a public company. Like had to be acquired, had to be put in place. Which like at first for Freight Farms, very painful. Like you know you're a fast moving, scrappy startup. And then all of a sudden you're like, cool, well, we gotta have reporting protocols, all the metrics that are expected of a public company, as well as like all the other stuff that goes with it. But you know, the big piece for me is that, you know, one, like when Freight Farms entered into the BCA to do this transaction, it was 18 months ago. Like in startup world, that's a decade, you know, and especially in the industry we're in, you know, indoor ag, controlled environment ag, has been, you know, consistently having its ups and downs and things like that. And, for freight farms, like, obviously my interest is in my baby, nobody else's interest, was, wait a minute, like, the industry is in a really interesting place. And there have been some pretty significant breakthroughs on the technology side over specifically the last 8 months that, again, to the point of being still a startup, is that like, there's a direction that we should be sort of moving towards.
Right.
And I think, part of the determination was just the friction of, you could make that move if you were already public.
Right.
You could make that move if you hadn't entered the agreement already. Mm-hmm. But like, there was too much of this limbo of like, wow, there's been some really, really powerful technical breakthroughs in the back end inside of this company that need to be applied to a huge market that has kind of like taken its lumps in like the indoor ag space, and are now the market's just more rational than it's ever been. So vetted, bulletproof tech that has phenomenal metrics for the outcome are what everybody's looking for.
Right.
And so, lo and behold, it's like, well, Freight Farms has that, like nobody else. And, there was just that friction there where it was like, okay, like, in a lot of ways, can't wait around because it takes a while to get the transaction done, to then do it and then wait and then make moves. Like, that doesn't work for a startup, especially when you see the opportunity and the technology is there. So like, from a macro level, I had been behind the scenes, because of course I'm not going to speak publicly if it's not allowed. I'm a good fiduciary. Did I say all my?
Not going to get in trouble. Not financial advice. Talk to your financial advisor. Blah blah blah.
But I mean, like, from my perspective, sort of when I was get it in the behind the scenes, it's like, holy shit! It's like this is what we'd been hoping for. Like, so we caught some breaks technically. I can't say caught breaks because there's a lot of hard work, but Dave and a lot of the other teams, and it's like, and the opportunity is out there for us. Mm-hmm. We should go get it, And so I've been kind of banging that drum a little bit behind the scenes.
Right.
It just kind of came. It was good because the SPAC sponsor, Agronom, and their whole team, were exceptionally diligent and like looking at the transaction, evaluating, talking to the team, talking to the board, all that, and like, to a certain extent, I'll give them a lot of credit because like they have a large vested interest in this transaction.
Sure.
And to sort of say, okay, the world changes, the world did change, like this is the best thing for both entities. Yes, like let's not make this contentious. Let's talk about it. Like terminating the agreement. It's an outcome. It's not the outcome like anybody wants when you start a deal. It's like you go into you partner with somebody and you're like, we should work at this for about a year and a half and then stop. And like, nobody wants that, but sometimes it's the best outcome.
I mean, again, like from like a very founder-centric perspective, right? I think like sometimes founders are like doom and gloom, end of the world if like we had a conversation with a client for a month and nothing came of it. Mm-hmm. Like I'm like, welcome to the business world. Sometimes you're talking for like years on end and like nothing ever comes of it. Sometimes it's even like a net negative, right?
Yeah.
And so, I think that in the case of like being able to determine like some of these decisions at later stage companies, like, like being private, being public, these are certain conversations that I know that like, they're potentially better people than like maybe even us to have that conversation, but 100%. You're definitely been like deeper in it than me. I guess I'm only saying this as like a observer, right? And someone who's, only been at it through research and observation, would say that like, I guess, how does it feel? Because to me, like you basically saw like the light at the end of the tunnel.
Sure.
And it turns out it was, a warning light to tell you to go right, slow down and go right in the tunnel as opposed to being necessarily at the end of it, right? And I just, to me, I'm just wondering, like, you can take it two ways, right? One is, shit, right, like, this sucks, I'm not happy about it. Yep. The other end is, like, as a private company, we can do things that we couldn't have as a public company,
Yep.
and we can redouble our efforts there. I'm just wondering, like, as a founder, but not necessarily one who's like in the driver's seat, but just as this is your child and this is your baby, like, what are your feelings? Like, how are you feeling about this?
Oh man, I should get the couch out.
I know.
Okay, explore that feeling.
Explore it, yeah.
No, you're 100% right, and I think I guess I never saw it as like the light at the end of the tunnel.
Interesting.
And part of that is because I had already made moves to sort of be at arm's length, so I had an executive team in place.
Right.
With. So it was less. There was less of like my personal kind of ego tied up in it, and more of, again, kind of being that parent and saying, all right, what's best here for my kid? Where, again, 18 months ago, 20 months ago, we were like started talking and evaluating and whatnot, having freight farms public, like ego wise, be like, cool, it's a public company, like, say what you want, be like, I took my first company public.
Right.
That's a cool startup thing to say, like, you want to be able to put that somewhere, sometime, I guess.
Mm-hmm.
But for my mentality was, okay, like, great, that's awesome if it happens. That's not the reason to do it. And there were enough reasons from a business model perspective, like Freight Farms as a public company being able to, push manufacturing, access different capital markets, things like that, to like finance physical inventory, things like that, like, in order for us to continue to scale and grow at the level we had been, were necessary. So it's like, we're just gonna be a victim of our own success if we don't get there. And again, like, technology changes, market changes, like some of those constraints and like the future of freight farms aren't there anymore.
Right.
So it's like, okay, one of the big benefits, not there. That big benefit comes with a lot of drawbacks. But I guess, to get into the deep emotions of it, it was, there were highs and lows. Like, because you get to this, I personally got to the, point where I was like, SPAC, I don't know. Then it's like, actually, deal looks good, partners are good. Holy shit, I could have a public company on my hands. That's awesome. I feel good about that. Like, there could be a financial windfall, like have a boatload of ownership in a now public company that can trade, can sell, can do whatever, like that. I was like, oh shit, that would be awesome. Hadn't fully internalized that for a while. And I was like, that would be life changing. Like that's like, that's an exit type that is like life changing money. So yes, I got excited about that. There's no way not to. But yeah, at the end of the day, I think I was in a fortunate position that I was just arm's length enough that I could take a more pragmatic, sort of emotionally removed view of like how things were going, how it was progressing, to then, when both parties sort of decided to terminate the agreement, I was like, okay, I feel like if there's any founders that are listening, like this is something that took me a long time to get used to, is you're inevitably 3 weeks to 3 months emotionally ahead of the rest of the team and most of the people around the table.
Right.
Because you've had to think about these things and probably take action against them 3 weeks to 3 months before they even know it's happening. So, by the time this happened, I'd already been thinking about it 3 months ago.
Yeah.
This could be a really interesting opportunity. I'm very excited about that. All those other things. At that time, I just felt more anxiety around like, okay, if everything that is happening inside the company on the tech side and the market developments are all true, and it's looking more and more like they are, like, can we execute against those? Are we stuck? Are we on the wrong path to go get it and to like go where the business naturally should go and take the technology? Basically, it's like the engagement I did have, in any active role was like just thinking about what is the highest use for the technology we invented. Which is a fun spot to be able to work with. A bunch of like nonprofits, family offices who are trying to like use the technology to do really, really, really impactful good things. That, for me, the mentality morphed into like, the anxiety moment was the technology has taken a quantum leap here from when I left, which I'm very excited about. is this the highest use of the technology? Like, I had been focusing on like what we could do for nonprofits, for developing countries, and all these other things, and I was like, actually, like, this could change the landscape for vertical farming CEA, and like usher in like this like vertical farming 2.0 movement. And it's like, so I got very excited about that, and then got very anxious. So it's probably your classic sort of founder middle of the night stuff. Like, I'm so excited, I'm so anxious. I'm so excited, I'm so anxious. I'm so excited. I think it's, I don't know what's gonna happen. So definitely been a whirlwind of emotions, but that's to be expected.
And I guess to cap off this discussion, I think that, not to gas you up, not just, as a fellow podcast host here, but I'm just saying, like, I think you should be proud, because I think that even though it's not necessarily something that went as well, but I think that you should be proud of yourself and your team to actually get you to the point where these decisions could have been made, and, you're getting to the end, end of like a very long founder journey here, right? Yeah. And I think that most founders don't even come close to even having a decision about like going public, and going public via SPAC or whatever financial instrument, right? And so I think that should be a prideful moment at some point, right? And to realize how far the company has gone, how far you've gone as a founder, right? And maybe something to take going forward for Morsi Market and for other things. You've experienced something that 95%, 99% of founders haven't, right? And so I think that's something that should be taken into account.
Yeah, no, I mean, it's a good point. I mean, like, thank you. That's nice to say. But I think I'll say it speaks to why it's really good to develop a network, find peers who are in the trenches, whether it's same industry, completely just really unrelated, whatever, because everything you just said is true, so thank you for saying it, but also like don't see it at all, just there's no reflection, there's only forward motion, and I would probably do well at this point in life to sort of occasionally be like, okay, that was cool. Right. Like, if nothing else, that was a phenomenal experience, and learned a ton, and have a lot to bring moving forward. Right. So yeah.
It's actually reminded of a conversation, and it's funny that we were talking about football earlier, of a quote, and like it was kind of a football like narrative that was going on for a little bit this weekend of Baker Mayfield, who's now the current quarterback of the Tampa Bay Buccaneers, talking about the post-Brady era at the Buccaneers, talking about how tense it was to have Brady there, and how it was a very pressure-related culture that was there at the Buccaneers, and how he's trying to make it more fun and more light and then Tom Brady responded by saying, look, we won a championship with that culture, right? Yeah. And like, if I wanted things to be fun, I'd take my kids to Disneyland. And that was kind of his response.
Oh, I didn't see
and
that.
I think that it's certainly interesting how different people internalize different situations, and how maybe being at different points of someone's career can lead to someone seeing things in different ways, right? It's just perspective, right? And to Baker Mayfield, who, hasn't been to Super Bowls and hasn't been, in a championship position. Maybe at the college level he did, I believe winning the Heisman and that type of stuff. I think maybe winning the national championship. I don't remember if the Sooners made it. But, But Tom Brady, obviously 7 Super Bowls in, 20-year-long career, right? Does things a certain way and sees things in his particular way, right? I think that, we're kind of seeing a difference in perspective, like how you see things, and how me earlier on in my career kind of like, shit, I would be happy to be able to be in the position to have decisions about like SPACs and those type of stuff, right? And so from that perspective, I'm like, it is super cool to be able to see that happening, and seeing like what does the light at the end of the tunnel even look like, right? Because you can kind of see it in the news, and you kind of have it, but to actually be able to have discussions about it, right? And like be able to hear like what was the thought process and the emotional byline in that process, it's totally like different than just being like, oh, I can see like the pundits on CNBC talking about, Airbnb going public, or in the last cohort of public companies, right? And like Stripe not going public for certain reasons, right? And them staying private, or this and that. It's like being a spectator in the stands, but then you're like, I actually get to sit down with someone who's coming up to the Super Bowl win, the ring, right, moment of startups, which is like going public or making a major acquisition, like you're almost there, right? You're in like the playoffs, if you will, of the startup stage, and that's super cool as someone who's like, I'm still probably in the preseason compared, right? So
I think it makes a lot of sense, and I think one of the things that I always thought was bullshit when I was like younger in the journey is that like I'd hear other people who would raise the seed round, then raise an A or a B or whatever, and they're like, all right, like there's you'd hear these like people who are respected would be like, oh, it's just one step in the journey, like it's not it's not the end goal, and I'm like, okay, but like then you go into fundraise and you're like, but no, really, that's all, like it's that or nothing, so that is the goal, and it's it's kind of that idea of narrow the focus, like like from a Tom Brady perspective, whatever, it's like do the work because there's wins along the way to get to the ultimate goal, but then like,
and there are losses,
and so there's an idea of like you need to get that win, and that win is going to be critical because without it you don't get to the next, you don't have the option for the next one, and so taking it by there, but then I think the big difference between like a Baker Mayfield, who knows how his career will go, and a Tom Brady is that like Tom Brady was like, I'm gonna win as much as I can every single day to give me the opportunity to the ultimate goal, but like then when I get there, like I just want to keep winning. I just want to keep going forward. It's not like I got my Super Bowl win and now like I'm kind of feeling like I got it,
right.
Like, and part of it is that like there's if the ultimate goal is that Super Bowl, if the ultimate goal is that IPO, or that huge acquisition, you're gonna get there and it's gonna be like every other accomplishment in life that you get there and you're like, oh, I thought this would like feel better or be better, or like I thought I would have a sense of, I don't know, relief or fulfillment or whatever, and it's like and whether you admit it to yourself or not, like you achieve that objective and you're like, all right, everyone tells me this is like the best thing ever. It's like, and it's like, don't get me wrong, like I don't think anybody would bitch about like, oh, I took my company public, or I was acquired for $1 billion. Like no one's gonna be like, damn it, I wish that hadn't happened. But you're not like all of a sudden, you're still the same person you were the day before. So like, does that make you better? Does it make you worse, or does it not change you at all? And it's like 9 times out of 10, it like I would imagine you get confused by the emotions. And you're like, well, I did it. Okay, cool. So like I can, I can do it again, because there's that like survivorship bias where you're like, oh yeah, thinking back, it wasn't that hard. It's like, oh wait, reality, like I almost died here, aka like was within 1 inch of a loss so many different times. And it's like, and there's so many probably, at least in like a Tom Brady career, so many examples where it's like, like I love when the pundits or whatever, like, he should have 11 Super Bowl championships because if you look at this season, and that happened, and then this loss, and it's like, but it's like, like the difference is like that intensity that just continue to move forward is what.
It's a lot of like, you never know a lot of these things, right? And I think like, I think that if you are the type of person, right, to be put into a position to be successful, you're driven in a certain way, right? And I think that there are certain cases where there's like the retire to an island after success guy that makes it to the end, but like that's probably an outlier, and the majority of people are the always hungry, the always maniacally working towards something, and is not content at some point, right? And the lack of being content about something, I think is something that I kind of see in you, and is something that I've kind of pattern matched over the years, right? It's like I'm not going to settle for this. I think that there's just that itch that comes in.
Yeah. No. So I mean, I would agree. I mean, I think it's a good. At the end of the day, you know, like that person that wants to have some success and then retire to an island, like I'm sometimes jealous of that person. Like, I would like to do that. Actually, that sounds nice today, but I know I would get to that island and be like, what am I doing here? So like, well, you know, I guess this is me sort of talking about both sides of my mouth. Like,
Yeah.
Both work. You know, both get there. You know, if you're strictly from a look at the business, look at an investment kind of thing, where it's like, you know, that person that gets the island, they're like, they got there. You know, they won. Like, so like, if you're putting dollars to donuts to say like, I need a Super Bowl win, you're like, well, if I'm investing right now for this Super Bowl.
Yeah.
And if you get me there, like, you know, yes, I'm going to continue to back Tom Brady.
Right.
Like, the odds are that he's going to keep getting there. But like, I'm also going to be looking at you saying, you might literally be like, I'll play 3 seasons, and on the 3rd season, if I get the Super Bowl, as soon as I win the Super Bowl, I'm retiring. Like, you're not gonna be like, I hate this sport. I'm really good at it, but I hate it. And so I'm gonna play until I win my Super Bowl, and then I'm retiring. It's like, that could be season 1, it could be season 20. I don't care. You know, it's like.
I guess that's also true. Yeah.
You know,
I'm
like,
good at something, but you know, like, yeah.
You know, and then in a lot of ways, you don't know until you get. For a lot of people, they probably don't know until they get there. Like, am I that get to it? Am I that buy an island and retire guy? Like, I don't have the option to buy an island and retire. So like, I don't really know. You know, but yeah, there's a certain aspect that you can vet in people that you want to work with that, like, you know, at the end of the day, get fulfillment and get energized from doing a lot of work, a lot of hard work, and like a lot of unrewarded work.
Right.
That's starting up. Like, you're doing shit that like you would never take a job doing this. You know, and like you'd like feel bad hiring somebody to do this. It's so bad. You know, but you're like, you know, I don't know, for some reason I want to do more.
Yeah.
You know? So it's a strange thing.
Yeah. You talked to me earlier this week about, you know, and I like obviously like knowing you, like you've talked a lot about loving the like travels that you've been able to go on, and you know, part of the journey of working in a field where a lot of things are interconnected. You often go out to like conferences, conventions, those types of things.
Yeah.
And I think that you had discussed something with me earlier that I think would be a great thing to bring up and kind of cap off this conversation. And talking, funnily enough, about like at scale public companies, right? You had noticed that there was a particular company that was going around the circuit within the food tech industry, and you had some particular takes on it, and I think that it would be good to kind of poke at it, right? You had discussed about how you were seeing Instacart being like a big fixture within food tech conferences and a lot of conversations around, and how they've been kind of integrating them into different parts.
Yep.
And you know, I think that, you know, YC company, great startup story, great startup result for the founders and for you know, the community writ large, right? Being one of the major successes to come out of that last mile / food delivery space.
Yep.
You know, but you had a particular thought about some of the things that they've been doing lately.
Yeah. No, I think it's an early thought, but like it's become very clear in my mind. And the one thing I will say, you know, anytime I would go and criticize a company, is I want to be sure to separate the people from the company. Because like every organization, every company, like, is filled with individuals who are doing really good work. But at the end of the day, sometimes, you know, I'm trying to figure out who said this, because it certainly wasn't me that made the quote, but like the idea of like, show me the incentives and I'll show you the behaviors, or like show you the outcomes or what have you. You know, I want to say it was Charlie Munger, but I'm not 100% sure. I have no idea why that is. But to my point, I've become increasingly aware and disturbed by what Instacart has become as part of a much, 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 much larger problem, like a society level problem here in the United States, where the retail grocery mechanism has become essentially a delivery mechanism for chemical packages that were once called food. So like, ultra processed food, a lot of CPG brands, sugar laden, fat laden, chemical bombs that provide no real nutritional value to the human body. And so I was trying to figure out Instacart, because I'm seeing them everywhere, and I'm like, how does this work? And I had known that, leading up to going public, they need to put a business case together that says, hey, like, we can continue to grow, and everyone's like, the public market's like, groceries a pretty terrible business, and you're not even a grocery store? Like, your last mile delivery, like, which we know is a terrible business. So like, but if you put grocery and last mile delivery, it must be a good business. And I think everyone was like, no, that's not how that works. And there was an element that, they launched an ad platform, which I was like, okay, that's smart. Like, you spend years putting yourself between the grocery store and their customer to capture them at what is increasingly the point of contact for shopping, which is digital. So like, get in front of them first, and then build that network. So then put ads against that, so on and so forth. It's tale as old as time in tech business. Like, at the end of the day, what large tech business isn't an advertising company? Like, I'm sure we could go down the list, but I don't have that in front of me. But point being, I realized what was making me so uncomfortable and nervous was two things. One, retail grocery had evolved over the last 50 years or so, and essentially it built the horse and buggy delivery mechanism for this ultra processed, shitty chemical products that used to be called food, and had continued to marginalize real food. Like, look at the grocery store 50 years ago, 20 years ago, 10 years ago, now. That at one point was an outer ring of fresh, healthy Whole Foods, and then it's like, it's a corner, and now it's a small section, because the money was in, shelf-stable chemical products that, were addictive and could drive up volume, and that's all you care about, is getting volume through your store. So I was like, all right, they built a very effective kind of, hindsight 2020, was a horse and buggy delivery mechanism for the CPG companies, the ultra-processed food companies, to get more addictive products into the hands of people at younger ages more conveniently. And I was like, all right, well played. Like, I can respect a good business, and like, that's a good business. The same way, like, before everyone admitted that they killed everybody, cigarettes was a phenomenal business. Like, an addictive product, get it everywhere, start them early, and then, it doesn't kill them right away. It keeps them alive for a long time until they die. And then looking at Instacart, I was like, holy shit. I was like, again, respect the business they built. Like, gotta do it. It's a great business. But essentially built that bullet train, like, cruise missile delivery system to go mainline to the American public to deliver ultra-processed CPG based. And I was like, all right, again, show me the incentive, show me the outcome, or show me the behavior, because like, this is a pretty outlandish claim to some. So then I looked at it a little bit and said, okay, how do they make money? It's like, all right, volume wise, selling groceries, absolutely, but a huge portion of their business and majority of their margin comes from selling advertising. So I said, okay, let's break that down even further. It was something in the vicinity of like 60% of their profit comes from like the advertising platform element of it, which is growing at some large number year over year, which is great for their business.
Yep. Mirrored in other, like Uber, for example, seeing the same thing, along with a name that you wouldn't normally think of, but Amazon, their advertising portion of just like having something appear at the top of a shopping page. That's also a major category.
Yeah, I was with actually my former CMO from Free Farms. We do some like brainstorming sessions and work on some companies together. And every few Fridays we'll get together. And and he was telling me, he's like, do you realize like from a search engine perspective, like Google is actually like number 2 or 3 depending on what demographic you look at. Like whereas like Amazon's number 1 for searches, like Walmart's number 2, because most people are now going online and searching specifically for like something they want to buy or something they want to get or a gift idea or food stuff or whatever. And so a little bit of an aside, but when I looked at Instacart further, I was like, oh shit. I'm like, this hunch was right in that 70% of their advertising dollars come from a blend of CPG companies, ultra processed food, soft drink beverages. So like that's 70% of the marketing dollars that are going in. And those advertisers are not shy about imposing their will on those that they spend billions of dollars with to say, hey, like, we want to get right in front of, we want to do this, we want to do that. Right. It's, it's not, again, not Instacart's fault. I don't think anyone there did anything bad. Like, it's a phenomenal service. Like, I've used it. I like it. I'm like, but it's, to a certain extent, it's the same outcome as like a social media, where it's like great tool, net positive in so many ways of connecting people and keeping people in touch. These hard things to do, but there's certain externalities that have on social media are now being addressed, or at least brought to light. Right. In this like next wave of retail grocery specifically, like the level of harm that can be done by applying this system to the population, which is already 60% of the U.S. population has some form of diet, lifestyle-related disease, be it hypertension, diabetes, XYZ. 60% of the population, and we haven't even really turned on the bullet train delivery mechanism to get even more. So like that number is only going to be able to go higher faster. And so it was kind of those two things, like those facts hit me like a ton of bricks. And then I became very, very nervous because I started realizing, okay, I'm seeing them more and more present in the conversation around the tables at Food is Medicine events. Whereas like that mechanism that is driven, financed by, and incentivized to act on behalf of ultra processed food to get it into more people at more volume by any means necessary should be nowhere near healthcare and the mechanisms that are trying to make people who have been made sick by the system that you're supercharging, trying to combat that by getting them, the right medicines, the right foods, the right lifestyle changes. Like, it's a scary, scary proposition that it just hit me. It hit me pretty hard. Where it's like, holy shit, if this is allowed to happen and something doesn't come in and cut that off, or at least monitor that or regulate it or what have you to ensure that the dollars are not simply saying like, oh, ultra processed foods, I can't go into healthcare and these programs because you can't do it. And they're like, don't worry, we'll find a way, because we've got a main line into your population, and we're just going to do it all over again. So yeah, I sent that note to you, and I was like, dude, this is blowing my mind, and it's a scary world that I'm seeing.
And I guess, right, and like it's just quintessential to how marketing is. One of the things that I've noticed over the years is that a lot of companies, and marketing is very cyclical. When times are good, marketing budgets go up. When times are bad, marketing is one of probably the first things that get slashed, right? Yep. And one of the reasons for that is because attribution is so nebulous, right? You can't really, I don't think anybody has ever, there are startups that are constantly trying to chip away at this, but I don't think there's actually been a definitive tool that's been able to say, like, these marketing channels are the best. And so technically you just omni-channel, try to get into as many distribution channels as possible to get in front of as many people. And there's plenty of statistics like, there's X number of touch points that a consumer needs to touch before they make a purchase and all that type of stuff. And so it makes sense that a lot of companies, when they hit that at scale moment, attack these marketing budgets, and especially now that we're presumably so coming off of like a down based off of like inflation, it's abating, and like we're kind of going back into that upswing. You're probably going to see marketing budgets increase and companies being able to take more advantage of maximizing profits via marketing channels. And so I guess one of the interesting things as you were talking about this, and one of the things that kept popping into my mind was like, I really enjoyed having my subscription to HelloFresh up until a certain point.
Sure.
And like, one of the things that I kind of thought as you were discussing this was there's technically like an illusion of choice within Instacart, right? To be able to advertise and provide choice and selection within that.
Yeah.
When you go to those meal order kits, which I guess even like before, like we can have two parts of this question. One is like they don't have that same level of choice because they prescribe, right? Almost as if it's like food is medicine. They're prescribing food for you because you don't really have a choice. You have choice of recipes and you have choice of dietary restrictions, but ultimately they have their supply chain and they're just pushing what they've got to you, right? And presumably what's economical for them. I guess the other side of it is you know, and maybe it's because of the name, right? Is HelloFresh actually good for you? And like, it seems to be better than just like getting slop, right?
Sure.
That's like, you know, a Wendy's like, you know, fresh ground beef patty, which really is not that is not healthy for you. It is actually extremely terrible for you because of this reason, you know, and that reason and all that type of stuff, right? HelloFresh, and you're like, you know, this feels healthier. But yet they don't have the advantages of marketing because they don't have product variability. And I wonder from your perspective, right? Like if we have these healthier options, right? They're more premium, they're more, you know, bougier really. At some points. Does that come into like friction in some particular ways where you have higher volume slop, right? And they have the budgets to be able to market. And I guess it's always going to be a competition between the healthier options, which are bougier, premium, maybe more of like lesser like household names, right? And really we want to move people towards more of these like healthier options, but you know, economically.
Yeah, no, well, I mean, I think
I'm just wondering how do we get there?
So, I mean,
there's a couple questions there. But.
Yeah, I mean, it's a fundamentally broken system, like as how we feed ourselves as Americans, like using retail grocery as the example, you know, and is there an opportunity for, you know, a tech platform like an Instacart would be a great example. Like, could they make a fundamental difference in making the country healthier? Absolutely, I think, because they are able to use all the things that we know from, you know, 20, 30 years of building technical products, user behavior, flows, like gamification, all the other bits that get people, you know, where to drop in little dopa hits, things like that to keep people engaged and coming back, how to enrage them so they make sure they come back, you know, like all the things that have been learned. Like, those could absolutely be used for good, to push and nudge and, you know, and make sure people are skipping, or not even skipping, but going only to healthy whole foods, lettuces, carrots, you know, tomatoes, whatever. Like, all these products, these commodity products that have no budgets, they don't advertise, you know, like, that just doesn't really happen. But, like, the Instacart will not do that because it's incentive-wise, economically, it's not in their best interest. You know, like, how happy are all of the CPG ultra-processed food companies going to be with Instacart when they're like, cool, we're buying ads from you, you know, that gets people to buy our foods in the giant air quotes. You know, what are you doing? You're now like putting these digital plays and user interfaces and things in place and gamifying to reward people to buy stuff that's not our product. That's bullshit. Like, what we want is more attribution. You know, like, we want to be able to say, oh, you instituted that flow because it gets to a 2 liter of Coke that's now 2 for $1. You know, so they get the volume, they get all that, and they're like, and Instacart with feedback to them, be like, look, this nudge at this time for this consumer gets them to go to 2. They didn't buy 1 2 liter of Coke, they bought 4 because they were like, well, I can afford 2, but it's 2 for 1, so I got 4. You know, like, and the advertiser's gonna be like, that's awesome. And so, like, that spend of specific X, 32 cents. And I know I make, you know, 17 cents per bottle of, you know, 2 liter. If you bought 1, it would have been okay. You bought 2, I'm good. You bought 4? My return on ad spend with you is phenomenal. I'm in.
Right.
All in on that. Do that for all my products all day long. You know, and Instacart's gonna cha-ching, cha-ching, as they should as a corporate entity. You know, and meanwhile, all the healthy options, boom, gone. Don't even just stop coming up. The same way, like you go to Google, you go to some of the search engines, like how hard is it to find an unsponsored post? You know, you're like, oh, I go to page 3 to get to like this one.
Mm-hmm.
You know, it's the reason, you know, like Perplexity or one of these. It's like a really nice tool because you're like, all right, cut through the noise for me, bring me right to something.
Well, unfortunately, when they get at scale, they're probably going to do the same thing.
Well, and I mean, that's where
sponsored AI.
Yeah, no, and that, I mean, it's again, it's like how do I don't have a great answer for it. Like that's where, like we are at the tail end of a phenomenally efficient solution to a problem that doesn't exist anymore. Like, and by that I mean, you know, 50 years ago, whatever it was, 70 years ago, when all these different farm bills and things, you know, were put into place, the problem to solve was getting people calories. End of the day, like people were starving because they just weren't getting enough calories. No one knew what food was going to morph into. You know, like there's no way to know. In 2020, like, you know, X% of our food isn't actually going to be able to be classified as food in every other major country on the globe. They'll say, no, you can't export that chemical to me. You know, like you can send me that same product without all that shit, but oh yeah, it's going to cost you more. Like a couple different problems to unpack within that, but you know, we're solving and optimized for a problem that just doesn't exist anymore. Like now we have an entire generation that has too many calories and not enough nutrition. Mm-hmm. So you got people who, you know, are 60, 70, 80% of the population in certain demographics obese, you know, and suffering from diabetes and all these other things. Like that's not a lack of calories, that's a lack of nutrition. And you know, and it's a great solution that's evolved to, you know, essentially run away with itself.
I will say that the one industry, and look, like I think like one of the traps that I've seen observing over the years, and like when we're talking about not having solutions, I'm like, when I hear that, I'm like, my brain starts churning. But immediately when you start thinking about like, oh, if I created like a Instacart but for healthy foods only, I've probably heard that type of pitch so many different types of things in so many different areas of like, these are green clothes only, like made in sustainable like blah 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 ways, or you know, this is, you know, travel but only green, right? Or like whatever, like it's certain ways in which founders try to niche their products to make them look like there's this competitive edge that you have, but ultimately gets washed away because it doesn't match consumer behavior.
Right.
And I think that when I start looking at this, right, I think the quintessential piece is matching consumer behavior. Mm-hmm. And I think the one area that has actually been successful in some ways, and I guess maybe I can pose the question to you, is in like athletics and in like, you know, protein powders and in like protein meals and like that type of kind of performance-based food, like companies like Huel or, you know, different like powder medicine, like protein powders and that type of stuff. Like presumably, and I guess I'm not a dietitian, so I can't really tell, but like presumably those are working well for those people who are like, it matches their consumer behavior, that they based off of their performance, they need to consume certain types of things, so it matches them to like do that. I guess for companies to be successful, like they need to be able to find a way into consumer behavior and like be able to match it for them to properly niche into a particular area. Like people are not naturally like going to go green. You have to make an effort to do that, right? And if someone is like already got it in their mind that they're going to become a power lifter, or they're going to become a marathon runner, or they're going to be like a major cyclist, or you know, whatever the range is of being athletic, right? That's already baked into their consumer behavior. Right. So being able to create companies that match that, that's great. I think that's a cohort that we look at and perhaps can mirror in different things. I guess that's just kind of my view of things. I guess, do you see that being beneficial to the athletics community, or are they just getting the same slop but reskinned? And could we apply lessons from that beyond if it works?
I mean, I think the answer to all of those, in my opinion, is yes. Like
Okay.
but it's like, you know, there's always going to be a gradient. Whereas some of them, you're just getting, you know, a shitty powder that has a certain protein content, you know, and like it's a marketing engine. It's not a supplement or a performance company. You know, those happen. You know, and then there's some that, you know, and again, like the market, I hope and I think does a good job to sort of weed those out. Where it's like, yeah, they might have a moment, you know, but then the consumer does wise up, like through counter marketing of the other brands that are saying, actually, look at this, you know, like that's not what you want to be taking. This is what you want to be, and like they go away because they're a bad actor to a certain extent. You know, and so there are lessons to be taken from that, but like, you know, my piece in railing against, you know, Instacart is like kind of like the lightning rod for like,
yeah,
they're not the only one, but like they have the biggest potential blast area when it comes to damage to be done, and why I freaked out a little bit over the last week or two that, you know, that type of weapon can't be allowed where you're trying to heal people. You know, like this woman I met in DC said something really profound and phenomenal. Like, you can't heal in the soil that made you sick.
Sure.
And so, you know, bringing that into the healthcare space where we're using food, whole, healthy food, as an intervention to heal people from that growing up in that soil, to ideally arm them to then go back out into the world with, you know, autonomy, budgets, whatnot, to know, okay, well, you know, sometimes it's, you know, arming somebody with the ability, tools to then say, I love Wendy's. There's nothing wrong with loving Wendy's. Who hasn't been to Wendy's? It's fucking delicious, you know. But like, I also recognize that like I have Wendy's and I'm like, I'm not actually eating a meal of like real food. Like, I enjoy this and that's okay, you know. Like, but I'm also not gonna be like, all right, cool. So yeah, just eat at Wendy's. You know, I do the breakfast, I do the lunch, I do the dinner, and expect to like feel good. You know, that's you know. So
maybe it's a. I don't know, actually. Like, I'm trying to think through my head how this sounds, but I mean, I'm having like that, you know, that Willy Wonka, like, was it like bubble gum or something, where like you eat it and it's like a full meal.
Oh yeah.
I'm like, could it possibly be that we're just in love with the taste of it as opposed to the actual thing? Like, I don't know. Like, if I had a Wendy's, I don't know, that's why it sounds kind of disgusting when I said it in my head, like a Wendy's flavored piece of gum, but I put it in and I'm like, Baconator taste.
Yep.
That's really all I'm looking for, as opposed to like, and I don't know.
It's definitely possible, and I mean, you know, let's like look at it like cigarette smoking, where it's like everyone's like, all right, like what is bad about cigarettes? Well, what is good? It's like, well, I don't know, but there were methods to sort of wean people off. One of which was a gum that had like the nicotine in it, but didn't have the tar, didn't have all the other stuff that you were putting into your body. So it's like, cool, don't do that. Step to here, you know. And
is it muscle memory then? Because then some people went off of smoking to do vaping, which is quintessentially the same motion. And I don't know if there's just like,
well, yeah, I mean,
like a thing where it's like a burger.
There's an addiction, and I mean, like there is like, so there's like the oral fixation element of cigarette smoking, like the actual act of which like gets tuned into your brain, that like you get a certain reward when you make this motion. And you're also addicted to the nicotine and all the other shit.
Biologically, for us,
and
like
so
eating,
and there's an element of eating that has a similar oral fixation. And in a lot of ways, like the chemistry and the marketing of what was formerly known as food products, you know, our bodies and our brains don't evolve as fast as like the technology to develop these products has. That's just, so we're like, you know, we're living in a, you know, medieval brain space of evolution with, you know, space age technology that just basically knows like all the right spots to poke to say like, okay, like when you get this sensation, it triggers in your body that like, you know, flavor from an evolutionary perspective, flavor is directly tied to nutrition, where it's like we evolved to be like, okay, this is sweet, it has a lot of nutrition, so the body's like, give me more. Give me more. You know, what the food companies are able to do is say, okay, this is really sweet. so the body's like, yes, more, don't stop. And there's this like weird thing where it's engineered sweetness so that you don't get the same fullness that you would get if you're eating something that is sweet. That's a whole just like regular food, like a whole healthy food. Take great strawberries or whatever, and you're like housing a bunch of good strawberries, and you're like, oh, these are so sweet, I love it. And then you're like, oh, I'm kind of full. You're like, I eat this other thing that has a sweetness level. It's probably much sweeter, so I'm enjoying it even more. I'm getting great response from my brain, but like I can eat buckets of it because my body's like, well, the precursors in the rest of my digestive tract are not set up to sort of take that signal from that chemical that gave me the sweet sensation, the same way it is from like the fiber and all the other elements within a strawberry that go into the system, and the body goes, cool, yeah, you filled up on like some sweet, high nutrition stuff. We're good. I'm good to go.
To cap off this conversation, I wanted to just bring up, because it kind of flashed into my head as you were talking about like the chemical and like how these interactions within the body is working. I guess the one wild card to bring up, and just to cap off the conversation, is what do you feel about like Ozempic? And obviously Ozempic has been in the news a lot, and you know, not to dive too deep into the science necessarily of it or that type of thing, but like, where do you think that lies within it? Because I feel like that would be like the 1A of like, or you know, the 1A of Instacart is getting slop into you, right? Because it's economically advantageous. The second step would be like creating a economically advantageous Ozempic into them, where it's like, hey, you're still healthy, but get more slop because you're more healthy, right? And like Ozempic technically is supposed to like tamp that down in you, but like Instacart doesn't care if like, you know, all that type of stuff.
Yeah,
so.
it's not in their economic best interest for, you know, a magic pill or an Ozempic to come along and be like, oh, I don't want any of the stuff that you're getting paid to sell.
So maybe there's a little like, you know, friction point.
So I mean, my take on Ozempic, and I'm just, you know, again, I'm not in depth on the science enough to speak to it. But like, as I understand it from a layperson's perspective, there's a lot of good there, in that the addiction to these chemical products that were formerly known as food is real and is killing people. Ozempic does have that ability where like all of a sudden people are saying, I don't want that anymore. You know, like I used to be like, I need to get, you know, like it's broken that. So in some ways it's like the, you know, a Nicorette or one of these where it's like just get the initial break, and then you need to follow up, because like, you know, it's known that like Nicorette gum alone is not going to stop you from smoking. It's like a good sort of like, get that cigarette out of your mouth, so on and so forth. You know, Ozempic, you know, can break that pattern in a new and profound way that's very dramatic. So it is a miracle, in my opinion, to a certain extent, where it's like you get somebody on Ozempic who's got, you know, a BMI of 40 or 45 or whatever it is, you know, they're diabetic, they're this, they're that, they're other thing. It's like, get them on Ozempic, get their BMI down, all of a sudden their A1Cs are under control, you know, like all these things are, these like acute signs are in a really good place, you know, and they're, you know, that core physical chemical addiction to the formerly known as food products, you know, is broken, and is broken for a period of time. And that's where I think like Ozempic is a great sort of, again, in this food is medicine space, like in food is health, of like, yeah, if somebody needs it, I think it's a great intervention and should be prescribed. And then it's just like everything else. It needs to come with support, needs to come with exposure, needs to come with education. Because like, you know, the corporations will be exceptionally happy if we go into a never-ending cycle of Ozempic to get healthy, go back out, Instacart to get unhealthy, Ozempic to get, and then, you know, and it just cycles.
Or it's just hand in hand. Like Instacart also brings you your Ozempic.
Yeah, which it will. It 100% will. You know, like, but then, I mean, that's
load up on slop because you know your Ozempic's gonna.
And I mean, at the end of the day, I don't know if more people will die, less people will die. Like, but we won't be any. We won't be.
Who knows what the long-term side effects of Ozempic are?
But at the end of the day,
figured that out yet.
Like the bigger problem there won't be like, will more people die, will less people die, although that is a very big problem. Like the bigger problem will be that we will just accelerate the point at which we just bankrupt our country. Like that should be the biggest fear of like if we get into this Ozempic Instacart cycle that is keeping people sick in that, you know, constant cycle, you know, or like no, you don't have to change your behavior. You just take this like Ozempic, you know, offshoot that isn't quite Ozempic, but it has the same effects to like, you know, cut weight, you know, all these other things. It's like, you know, they're going to be out there, you know. So I think that is the big fear, is that like Ozempic is a great tool, but it's a single tool that needs to be in concert with full treatment.
Right.
And again, that's where like I'm just going to come back to my point because I'm making it is like it scares me to death that like Ozempic could be bastardized and be used as a weapon the same way, you know, the chemical food companies have used advertising dollars to control the point of distribution, where like if that Instacart super weapon gets inserted into food as health, the outcome is going to be that cycle you just outlined of Ozempic to Instacart to Ozempic, and then, you know, I hate to be, you know, dramatic about it, but why not? Like, then we're at that point of we're not really worrying about like whether more people are dying or less people are dying because our country is bankrupt, and then we're in a world of hurt. It's like very like dark and end of days kind of thing, but
well, I think that we're kind of declaring public disruption target number 1 for our podcast is to kind of break this Instacart potential looming danger. And I think one of the things that we might see in the future is like Instacart pulling one of those like in the moment sounds good like PR campaigns where they talk about like, oh, we're going green, or we're, you know, support Black Lives Matter, or we're supporting DEI, and then they slowly, when it's no longer in vogue, like, you know, drop it by the wayside. I have a feeling they might do like a little campaign with it, like get the healthiest things possible.
Well, I mean, they're going to be the number 1 platform for the Ozempic opportunity from the CPG brands. You're already seeing it. Yeah. Like every ultra processed food company already has their Ozempic friendly line.
Yeah.
Which, what the fuck is that? You know, like, you know, and in many cases, like, oh, it's a reformulated version of the favorites that you love.
Right.
It's like, yeah, I'm really excited about reformulated favorites that are Ozempic friendly.
So I think we're gonna call for founders and call for ideas to kind of help disrupt that, because I think that that's going to be a major issue. I think that this was a really good conversation about, you know, companies, building companies, getting them at scale, and like now we're talking about an at-scale company that, like, they've gotten to a point where they need to do things that are in their shareholders' best interests. But I think that as founders, one of our like calling cards is to disrupt things, that even though something is in something's economic interest, we attack things that, you know, we try to go towards like solutions that can help fix some of these problems, right? And then, you know, find what is the economically advantageous way to solve some of these issues. And look, I think that trying to make people healthy has been like a consistent, like, we need to do this, we need to do this. There's so many different companies that have made their swings at bat at it. The reason there's so many people who are like swinging at this problem is because it actually needs to be solved. And so I think it's a really strong call, and I don't want to speak for you, but I think it's a really strong call for you to support founders who are working in this space, but also to, you know, if you are someone who is interested in it, has been inspired, or been quite honestly horrified by some of the prospects of like, you know, increasing obesity, increasing addiction to slop and like terrible, you know, chemical-filled foods. Like, I think that these are things that we need to tackle head on. And if you're a founder that, you know, is in the, you know, in the know and in a possible position to do so, you should definitely consider doing it. And I think that Brad and I are happy to be amazing resources in that area. And so, you know, I think that, you know, my always like big thing for every founder that I ever meet or thinking about being a founder or whatever is build, ship, and grow. And here we've had a great conversation with someone who's gone through all 3 phases for one company, working through another for another company. And, you know, I hope that you've enjoyed this episode. we'll be having so many more conversations about food tech, calling out things that we're seeing that's wrong within the industry, and hopefully also presenting ways in which we can inspire founders to work on solutions to solve these. So thank you so much for watching. Brad, any closing thoughts?
Yeah, I mean, I think I echo everything you said. Definitely, use this. It's an opportunity for disruption. I think at a higher level, I just want people to open their eyes to the future that we're going to live in, and there's a bigger systematic change that needs to happen at the governmental level, at the legislative level, at the regulation level. And like I say regulation, it makes me want to throw up in my mouth a little bit, because I'm a tried and true capitalist that believes that there should be as little regulation as possible.
But we're coming up against the guardrails here.
But there's certain elements that the government was established and regulators were established not to be disruptive, not to be move fast and do all these things like that. They're made to do the work that society in the capitalistic world is not incentivized to do, to make us better, to make us safer, and to make us healthier. Full stop. Avoid tragedy of the commons, make sure we have roads, make sure we have infrastructure, so that all of these startup innovations, disruptive companies have fertile ground upon which to grow, bloom, grow huge, disrupt themselves, get better, so on and so forth. But at a certain point, when the capitalistic imperative and the economic incentives are at odds with a healthy, thriving society, that's in my opinion, the number one reason we have government, we have legislators, we have those who we have voted in and put in charge to think long term and in ways that we would not do, because there's no economic incentive. It's not going to put hopefully real food on the table of my family and a roof over my family's head, by trying to change the system. So that's my closing here. And I will take my soapbox with me when I leave. But that's the thing, is I think we need to generally, as entrepreneurs and as innovators and across the board, just be realistic, be pragmatic about the future that we're setting ourselves up for, and take action against it. Do things. Start with yourselves. Eat more whole, healthy food. Support those and those companies that are trying to get more whole, healthy food out into the world. I wish there could be a plug for Morrissey, but we're not a consumer-facing company. We're back end doing stuff in healthcare. But support those that do. There are a lot of good ones, and so and then from there, just don't shy away from the conversation. And again, don't be afraid to call out bad actors. And even if they're phenomenal businesses, but at a certain point, and sometimes the health of the country and the future of our republic and the economic incentives of these big companies don't align anymore. That's okay. We have a long history as a nation of that. So again, I will take my box with me when I leave.
Well, thank you for bringing attention to that, Brad. Thank you to the audience for watching, and hopefully a future thank you to all the founders who are building amazing solutions to help solve some of these problems. Thank you so much for watching. Until next time, everyone.